The fighting spirit that has helped Ukrainian soldiers drive back Russian troops is being mirrored in the fight to keep the lights on and homes heated. Russia inflicted more than 50 targeted strikes on Ukrainian energy facilities during October, 1.5 times more than in the previous 7 months of the war. Last week, Ukrainian officials said around 40% of the country's energy infrastructure had been seriously damaged, all devastating households as around 80% rely on a centralised gas supply.
The nights are getting darker in Kiev, and not just because winter is coming. Much of the capital and of cities across the country now endure rolling blackouts every night, and the bitter weather hasn't even arrived yet. Few Russian tactics have been as successful in this war as their assault on Ukraine's energy infrastructure. Cheap Iranian drones burning up multi-million-dollar air defense missiles, but when they do get through, doing incalculable damage. The country's deputy foreign minister, now forced to give interviews deep underground, doesn't try to hide the impact of Putin's new tactic.
He believes that he can bomb you into negotiating, at least, if not giving up.
Absolutely. Let me make it clear. So there are two things that Putin keeps in mind. First is to destroy our energy infrastructure. This is what we see. Within the recent 2 weeks, they've been launching over 200 missiles and drones. Some of them are actually hitting the target, unfortunately, and it costs us lives.
But amid all this, Ukraine is actively trying to expand its energy infrastructure, sinking new gas wells despite the missile threat. This one, deep in contested eastern Ukraine, is just a few months away from coming on stream. The rig manager, as he showed me around, talking almost casually of dodging missiles.
We continue working, but we should be ready that from anywhere can fly some rocket or some drone.
The urgent need, of course, is to keep the lights on, to keep Ukrainian homes warm, to win the energy war against Putin. But long term, they point out that gas from Ukrainian wells like these could replace Russian exports to Europe.
Huge amounts of missile and weapon expertise have been transferred to Ukraine. Gas technology and assistance could soon be almost as important.
Getting more help will actually lead to energy independence of Ukraine. So the help is here, but we are open and seeking for more help. Technological help and also financing as well.
2022 has seen an energy war declared in Europe just as much as a military one. They have two things in common. The front lines of both lie in Ukraine, and in neither can the Ukrainians survive against Russia on their own. James Mates, News at 10, Eastern Ukraine.
And this evening, Russia's President Putin kept up his warlike rhetoric, saying the world is facing the most dangerous decade since the end of the Second World War. In a speech, he claimed the conflict in Ukraine is the result of Western efforts to secure its global domination, when in fact it is coming to an end. He did say, though, that there was no need to use nuclear weapons in Ukraine, neither militarily nor politically.
President Putin warns that the coming decade will be the most dangerous and unpredictable since the end of the Second World War. Well, meanwhile, the Russian President Putin has warned that the coming decade will be the most dangerous and unpredictable since the end of the Second World War. Speaking at a think tank in Moscow, he defended Russia's actions in Ukraine and claimed that the Russian economy had survived the worst of the sanctions imposed by the West. He also said the dominance of the West in world affairs is coming to an end. Our Russia editor, Steve Rosenberg, reports now from Moscow.
His war in Ukraine has not gone according to plan. But more than 8 months in, from Vladimir Putin, there were no regrets, no remorse. He blamed the West for the conflict and made only passing reference to the human cost of his invasion.
Of course, there's been a price to pay, primarily the losses connected to the special military operation. I'm always thinking about that. There are economic costs too, but there are enormous gains. Without any doubt, what's happening now will ultimately benefit Russia and its future. It will strengthen our sovereignty.
Strength is what the Kremlin leader is trying to project. This week, he oversaw massive exercises by Russia's strategic nuclear forces. A clear message to the West: don't mess with Moscow. President Putin was reminded he'd once said that in a nuclear war, Russians would go to heaven and the enemy to hell. We're in no rush to go to heaven, are we? He asks. There's a long pause. Your silence is worrying me, he says.
I paused on purpose, so that you'd be worried.
Vladimir Putin rejected Western accusations he's been engaged in nuclear saber-rattling. Russia, he claimed, had nothing to gain from a nuclear strike on Ukraine. But the fact remains that on the day of the invasion, he'd issued a very public warning. Any country that gets in Russia's way, he said, would face consequences the like of which they'd never experienced in history.
And the warnings continue.
According to Russian official nuclear doctrine, Russia would launch a strategic nuclear strike against the United States and all the NATO countries as soon as we witness the launch of Western missiles, no matter how armed they are, against our territories. And then the whole planet will die.
Moscow may be hoping nuclear rhetoric will scare the West into reducing support for Ukraine. It hasn't so far. Steve Rosenberg, BBC News, Moscow.